Hey, what's going on, humans? Happy Thursday. We are moving through grapes. Today we are moving on to the P, which deals with politics, like government, that kind of thing. So if you haven't already, pull up that notes paper. We're going to fill that out today. You should have the first three, the G, R, and A, filled out already. Um, we, we're going to fill out P today. So with that in mind, and if you all the videos from this week should still be open, so if you missed a day or something, you can always go back and fill that in, or watch the videos, that kind of thing. And we'll do a kind of a recap and expand on some of these a little bit more in detail next week. So if you missed something or are still a little confused on one of these, we'll go back over a few of these in a little bit more detail starting probably next week sometime. But here is your daily objective and question. The objective is just to understand who had much of the power in ancient Mesopotamia and how did they use it? Who do you think had most of, and then the question is, who do you think had most of the power in ancient Mesopotamia? So hopefully we'll be able to answer both those by the end of this. And with that being said, let's get into it with what kind of government was it? If you remember, we did a week or two ago about government and like economy. So today we're looking at what government is specifically in most of Mesopotamia. And that would be a type of government known as a theocracy, which that's not one we talked about last week, but it's similar to kind of like a monarchy / dictatorship, if that makes sense. But in a theocracy, it's where a priest or king, usually one person, rules over the people as what they believe to be a god or goddess. So these people, whoever's in charge, believes that they are a living, breathing version of God or their God here on earth. And they believe that they have divine powers because of it. Often the king in Mesopotamia, so sorry, ladies, no queens. The kings would claim they had what's known as divine right, which meant that they were told by the god that they were the ones chosen to rule over Mesopotamia, and if you went against them, you were going against their god or gods. And so it was hard to challenge the king because it felt like if you were challenging the king or challenging God in a sense. Oftentimes kings in Sumeria were often called Ensi, which is the Sumerian word for king. And as we'll see in Mesopotamia and going forward into Egypt and China and so on, religion and government are very much connected. So often who had religious power often had political power as well. So from this slide here, I would make sure you have down what a theocracy is and what divine right means, and also that the Ensi is the Sumerian word for king. So moving on to what responsibilities these people had. As the divine ruler, the kings of these different city-states in Mesopotamia had two major responsibilities they had to take care of. One of those was the physical safety of their people, as well as the religious protection as well. Oftentimes the kings had to work with the priests to ensure the spiritual needs of their populations were being met. Because if you remember from Tuesday, the Sumerian gods were known to be very picky, and if they weren't happy, their people were afraid they would destroy the earth in a flood or some other kind of natural disaster. So the king not only had to maintain the physical safety of the people, but also make sure their spiritual needs were being met too. And he often did that by working with the priests to maintain those ziggurats, those religious buildings, making sure sacrifices were in order if they were necessary, and just making sure the priests had everything they needed to maintain the god's happiness. Now, to maintain the physical needs, the king was often responsible for maintaining food supplies, finding water for their people, housing, and just maintaining the general function of the economy, getting people working, doing other things that were needed to run an empire. To do this, kings often created new taxes, they created new laws, and if necessary, they established an army to maintain order or to take over new lands. And so the king, for this slide, I'll make sure I've done the king's two primary goals were maintaining physical safety of the people as well as religious protections. So often, how was the power set up? Often it was a top-down approach. It started with the king, who had the most power over daily life. He decided everything from laws, taxes, how much the taxes were, when and if they went to war, and other daily operations of the empire. Often, if he didn't, he would set up some people below him to run smaller operations that see that weren't as important. And often, his rule was superior since he was believed to have the support of the gods. So after the king came the priests, and they were just as powerful as the king because they were the only ones who could speak directly to the gods, and they were the only ones who could perform the necessary religious services as needed. And we'll get into some of this a little bit more next week, but the further down this list you went, the less power you had in society. It typically looks something like this. You had the king at the top, then the priests, followed by merchants, artists, and scribes. Remember, scribes are those who wrote down the cuneiform tablets. Below them, you had farmers, and then almost always at the bottom were slaves. So as you went down this list, you had less and less power in society. And that's actually a pretty short one for today. Like I said, we'll go into a little bit more detail of this next week, but I wanted to go over it today so we have an idea of what it looks like. If you have any questions, be sure to let me know. Otherwise, I will see you all tomorrow.